It's been said that culture drives media, that it's the things that we do in our culture that's then reported by the media. But there's the converse view that, you know, media drives culture. Yeah, I think that's obvious in a way that we see when we see great adverts. People following kind. There's nothing new in that. That's why ad men are highly sought after. So, and Chomsky talks about that in his thesis, manufacturing consent, that you can actually drive opinion to the point that people will act against their best interests. So it's interesting to me how the BBC and the role of the BBC, which was once seen or lionized as wholly impartial, yeah, impartial broadcaster, has become a massively partisan broadcaster, and nakedly so. It's like they don't even pretend that they are objective anymore. Okay, it's about that Overton window, isn't it? Yeah, that concept of what is acceptable, the acceptable window, yeah, in our society gets broader and broader, yeah, and it gets pushed further and further to the fringes, and what was once seen as fringe behavior is now the mainstream. So with that in mind, it's me trying to enjoy football and trying to enjoy sport, yeah, and leafing through the results, of the World Cup and trying to know what's happening for tonight's game. When you see a headline like this, the harrowing dark side of England's World Cup exit, okay, and what we have here is and it happens every 4 years, yeah, but increasingly so it seems, yeah. We have victims groups and feminist groups, yeah, glomming on, yeah, to this national sporting event in order to push their agenda. That's what's happening here, yeah. So let's look at this. Let's read this headline. As the full-time whistle blew in Atlanta on Wednesday, signalling England's exit from the World Cup, a wave of disappointment spread across the country. But for some, there was a very different emotion growing inside. Domestic abuse rises 26% when England play, and by 38% when they lose. Yeah, according to research by Lancaster University. It makes it sound very official, doesn't it? Yeah, according to research by a university. Who wouldn't trust a university? During a major football tournament such as the World Cup, some women and girls are constantly living in fear. These figures have been constantly debunked. It's like the gender pay gap. Every year, the gender pay gap is wheeled out, yeah? And every year people say this is rubbish, it's been debunked, yeah? In fact, I think a woman won the Nobel Prize proving that these figures, the gender pay gap figures, are actually a bunk and not what is reported. But it doesn't stop the same victims groups and feminist groups, which are basically one and the same, hijacking culture. Yeah. And the BBC, which was once seen as partisan, yeah, is now incredibly partisan. Yeah. People talk about this. This idea has been actually going around recently. I've seen a wave of videos on this idea of and think pieces on feminization and why our culture has become woke. Why has our culture gone woke? I mean that in the modern and hijacked sense of the word, not in the original and quite cool black cultural sense of the word. Yeah. Why has our culture gone woke? Yeah. Why is it so brittle? Why is everybody offended? Why has our culture been driven into absolute conformity and conservatism? You only need to look at the BBC. yeah, which constantly posts, yeah, these hysterical headlines, yeah, which when you dig into them have not a shred of truth beneath them, not a shred of truth. So here we go. Rebecca Goshawk, who works for a domestic abuse charity, Solace, no conflict of interest there, was watching the semi-final against Argentina. We know that there'll be survivors and victims frightened of their partners coming home and worried about what that might mean for them and their safety, she said. They are being shouted at, they are being belittled, they are being told they're useless. It can be as strong as physical violence against women, whether that's being hit or kicked. For very few women, this will be a one-off experience. Because of a football tournament, it'll be a pattern that they're used to. So these figures have been widely debunked. This is actually not a thing, yeah? It happens also during the Olympic Games. They say, these same victims groups always say every 4 years that there's a wave of human trafficking, yeah, and that women and girls are being trafficked. And why would they do that? They do that because it's good for their money, yeah. They rely on public money, they rely on public funding, yeah, and so they manufacture figures. They manufacture figures in order to draw down funding, okay. And our national broadcaster doesn't seem to give a damn. You have more and more women in the workplace. I think it's more than 50% at the BBC now, yeah. And these women, who work for the BBC, they're graduate women and they are liberal feminists, to a man. Psych. They are liberal feminists, progressive, liberal, left-leaning. They just are. That doesn't mean that they are, in the kind of the socialist sense, in the working class sense, yeah, left as in Labour, yeah, but they are this progressive, liberal, feminist, girl boss, corporate, university graduate, middle class archetype, and they tumble out of their degrees, their graduate degrees, and straight into BBC apprenticeships. And they get into the newsroom and they start writing all of these headlines. And this is what we're fed now. This is what we're fed. So a man can't even find out about the game, without seeing these scare headlines, which have no shred, of evidence behind them. And before, you say, well, hey, Lancaster University, says, well, Lancaster University, like all of the universities, are now pushing the same liberal feminist thing, and it's just infecting our culture, and it's very disappointing to see. But it's worth commenting on, because it's worth commenting on in order to understand and have some sense about what we are seeing and why we are seeing these kinds of headlines and why our culture is drifting in this direction. Anyway, just a thought on what I've seen. You know the deal.